Hello once again, and welcome back to another haphazard recording. I am throwing this in the beginning of this recording to convey the information of the difficulty in the recording of this. Every time I rendered this video, there was something missing, sound gaps, pieces where sections were put in different areas, and I would ordinarily blame that on my inability and inexperience to edit. However, I have to re-editing this 7 times, re-rendering it each time at the tune of around 2 hours per render, and then reloading it and all of the different things that were happening with the uploading. And yeah, this is definitely some sensitive information, and it goes through a lot of most of how to handle the problems of being owned, and who owns and who hired Hitler and paid for a lot of seedy stuff. So this is a very interesting video, and I just wanted to convey the difficulty in creating it initially. So please enjoy, and I hope it all works out. Well, this is as much as I could save, we'll put it that way. Thanks for joining. Hello once again, and welcome back to another haphazard recording with Lance Reynard here to stand on top of the mountain and say I have been vindicated. In this particular video that I created on February 25th, 2019, I suggested, indicated, or otherwise stated innuendo, downright claimed Hitler was hired, and who was in on it, what the deal was, who hired him, essentially who hired him, as well as this guy. And of course we're not going to see their faces, but when I originally created this video, I was not that aware of my volumes, and so you will have possibly a little bit loud. I'd prefer to go loud than have you not hear me. So hopefully that is not too distressful. And this video that I ran across, called The Money Masters, as mentioned, absolutely verifies more than one of my videos on the control factor and the illusion that is created to the general public, to us. The illusions that are created are very important to look at, especially the ones of the past and who is involved, and this goes through a lot of that. Thanks for joining. The agenda here for these controllers, these money masters, is not just the money. It's about keeping everything. It's about power. And so if you don't know the land exists in the first place, has been my issue ever since I started my first video, is you are being deceived into thinking, first of all, that we don't have 50 times more land, and secondly, they're going to use their power control methods to take your land with the water rights and such. And this is part of my issue and part of my exposition. Thank you. The central banking system, or the international world banking system. This man spoke out against it, and all of the information here. So,
to club into
here we
submission
go.
or
These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of newspapers and the columns of these papers. To club into submission or drive out of public office officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. Theodore Roosevelt. In the way that I have begun to look at it after watching this video, and this thing is full of interruptions, but by print our own money, I mean our government printing our money. I don't mean each individual person printing their own money, but our government doing it rather than this so-called Federal Reserve outfit that has us in their clutches. I wanted to clarify that. A lot of interruptions in here, but I hope you don't mind making a point.
1970 book, FDR.
Because Lincoln did it. Lincoln printed his own money. Watch this video when you get into where Lincoln was kind of stuck in the Civil War, in the beginning of the Civil War, and why the Civil War started. And these scam artists and thieves like J.P. Morgan, and look at the people that they were with. We're talking Einstein, and we're talking ipso facto, gang, it's all a big setup. It's all about eventually taking over all your land and forcing you out with their little games and their little, it's not little. I mean, but we can do something about it. It can actually do something. And another interruption, but this is great. This is great. Now here I am narrating over this video, and notice that I continue my narration, but the sound stops at that point. Now check this out. With their little games and their little. Now watch this. It's not little. I mean, but we can do something about it. It can actually do something. And see, notice that I cut right out. Totally, even though the video is still going just without a problem. And what I said we were going to do is to have our government take over, print their own money, our people. I have an actual it's fairly easy way to fix everything, gang, and hopefully this part will stay in this next production, but I got a kick out of that, because your narration doesn't just cut off unless you shut off your mic. Okay, we'll see if I can get this one done. And now I should add to that addition that this is what was cut out of the video. Here, let me pause it for a moment. Pause. This is where it all went blank. When I started talking about, I won't say the name this time, he's a puppet of these people. He's, Bernie. Good old Bernie. Weekend at Bernie's. Don't you wish? And that's the part that disappeared. And then, of course, I came into the fact that he had brought Winston Churchill to the New York Stock Exchange to prove his power. And now, while I'm talking about it, at the moment of the crash, these two were standing there, and good old Bernie was saying what a great and powerful Oz he was. And Winston was standing in awe of his great master, and that's what disappeared out of the video. I think I should probably put it back. Thanks for playing.
The warning of Theodore Roosevelt has much timeliness today, for the real menace of our republic is this invisible government which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. It seizes in its long and powerful tentacles our executive officers, our legislative bodies, our schools, our courts, our newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection. To depart from mere generalizations, let me say that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interest, and
one more quick interjection about the Rockefellers and Carnegies and the men who built America. They were all financed. They were all set up. They were all puppets. And it's difficult for people who have gone through the historical narrative of these puppets and their history to believe that the people that print all of the money masters, set these people up. Not just Carnegie and Rockefeller, but other major men of power. I wanted to mention that in my video, because they're all puppets.
A small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paws of party leaders, use the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable.
I'd like to mention every device, like, using directed energy weapons on large towers in New York. And it was the Iraqis, see? It was the Iraqis, and we got to go out there and, and the Iraqanians need bullets in the head because, it's not that my family owns the Carlyle Group, the largest weapons manufacturers. Sure, we stand to make trillions, but I'd have got... So, they took down the towers, guys, to start a war.
To the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of newspapers and magazines in this country.
One thing I'd like to point out here again, 1922. This this guy was saying this in 1922, gang. So yeah, we haven't done anything about it. I got news for you, and a lot of people have known about it. How many have cared? And are we going to do something, or just sit and whine about it? Now I'm going to get ready.
Why didn't people listen to such strong warnings and demand that Congress reverse its 1913 passage of the Federal Reserve Act? Because remember, it was the 1920s. A steady increase in bank loans contributed to a rising market. In other words, just as it is today, in times of prosperity, no one wants to worry about economic issues. But there was a dark side to all this prosperity. Businesses expanded and became strung out on credit. Speculation in the booming stock market became rampant. Although everything looked rosy, it was a castle made of sand. When all was in readiness, in April of 1929, Paul Warburg, the father of the Federal Reserve, sent out a secret advisory warning his friends that a collapse and nationwide depression was certain. In August of 1929, the Fed began to tighten money. It is not a coincidence that the biographies of all the Wall Street giants of that era, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Bernard Baruch, etc., all marvel that they got out of the stock market just before the crash and put all their assets in cash or gold. This meant that both stockbrokers and customers had to dump their stocks on the market to cover their loans, no matter what price they had to sell them for. As a result, the market tumbled, and that day was known as Black Thursday. According to John Kenneth Galbraith, writing in The Great Crash, 1929, at the height of the selling frenzy, Bernard Baruch brought Winston Churchill into the visitors' gallery of the New York Stock Exchange here to witness the panic and impress him with his power over the wild events down on the floor. Congressman Lewis McFadden, chairman of the House Committee.
And this part also suddenly disappeared, where Thomas McFadden, chairman of the House Committee, was talking about that it was not accidental, it was carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all. Representative Thomas Lewis McFadden, now that part disappeared right mid conversation type thing. I'll just go ahead and play it a little bit.
Congressman Lewis McFadden, chairman of the House Committee.
And I cut it right where it cut off. But a lot of this information seems to be being sliced on purpose. But then I have sliced it like this. But he had passed it. The sound will come back in again. So these curiosities are just that. Curious anomalies that seem to be timed up quite specifically. And so thank you once again for bearing with this. He had passed an act at one time, enacted in 1927, dealing with our currency and the regulation of such details. And I wanted, of course, to verify how he had died, whether it was suspicious or a bullet in the head or a poison. And here we go, New York City, visiting with his wife. He was taken ill at his hotel and died. Well, that's getting the verification in on the wonderful moneymakers and how they treat anybody who stands up against them. So I'll probably not be talking to you anymore. No, just wanted to get closure on that. Thank you.
In February 1931, in the midst of the Depression, he put it this way.
I think it can hardly be disputed that the statesmen and financiers of Europe are ready to take almost any means to reacquire rapidly the gold stock which Europe lost to America as the result of World War I.
Curtis Dahl, a broker for Lehman Brothers, was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange the day of the crash. In his 1970 book, FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law, he explained that the crash was triggered by the planned sudden shortage of call money in the New York money market.
Actually, it was the calculated shearing of the public by the world money powers triggered by the planned sudden shortage of call money in the New York money market.
Within a few weeks, $3 billion of wealth simply seemed to vanish. Within a year, $40 billion had been lost. But did it really disappear? Or was it simply consolidated in fewer hands? And what did the Federal Reserve do? Instead of moving to help the economy out by quickly lowering interest rates to stimulate the economy, the Fed continued to brutally contract the money supply further, deepening the Depression. Between 1929 and 1933, the Fed reduced the money supply by an additional 33%. Although
33% reduction in the supply of money, and the way that they reduced the money was to keep it, was to get as much as they could and not let it go physically and not print anymore or release any of the printed.
Though most Americans have never heard that the Fed was the cause of the Depression, this is well known among top economists. Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist now of Stanford University, said the same thing in a National Public Radio interview in January of 1996. The Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. But the money lost by most Americans during the Depression didn't just vanish. It was just redistributed into the hands of those who had gotten out just before the crash and had purchased gold, which is always a safe place to put your money just before a depression. But America's money also went overseas. Incredibly, as President Hoover was heroically trying to rescue banks and prop up businesses, with millions of Americans starving as the Great Depression deepened, millions of dollars were being spent rebuilding Germany from damage sustained during World War I. 8 years before Hitler would invade Poland, Representative Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, warned Congress that Americans were paying for Hitler's rise to power.
Okay, gang, did we get that? Another quick interjection here. It was, of course, the international bankers that were doing the money transferring, and just a certain number of people with big names like, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, that hoarded their own. And I'm not saying America was, well, you see how the money transfer occurred through the faceless international money masters that were setting up a land grab, using Hitler as an enforcer. So
those bankers bought her, and they now own her lock, stock, and barrel. They have purchased her industries. They have mortgages on her soil. They control her production. They control all. Now,
you really, I've noticed a lot of people have mindsets. You think Japanese money is Japanese money, and Chinese is Chinese money, and German money is German money. Gang, it's all coming from the same makers. It doesn't matter what the faces are on the money. If I say we're giving Germany our money, we're physically giving them the ones with our presidents on them, putting them over there is what they were doing then. But when they deal with German international, German this, German that, they're still using the same money that they were given. They don't have, transfer the German faces for the, no. It's international currency, and that's how they maintain control.
All her public utilities. The international German bankers have subsidized the present government of Germany, and they have also supplied every dollar of the money Adolf Hitler has used in his lavish campaign to...
Okay, every dollar. I know I'm really pounding this in, but I had so many people tell me I was wrong about that. Yeah.
To build up a threat to the government of Brüning. When Brüning fails to obey the orders of the German international bankers, Hitler is brought forth to scare the Germans into submission.
Scare the Germans into submission, much like the front guy, the hit man, the enforcer of a mafioso group.
Through the Federal Reserve Board, over $30 billion of American money has been pumped into Germany. You have all heard of the spending that's taken place in Germany. Modernistic dwellings.
Another thing to consider. $30 billion of American money. This is where 30 billion, what is that today? About 110 billion or more?
Her great planetariums, her gymnasiums, her swimming pools, her fine public highways, her perfect factories. All this was done on our money. All this was given to Germany through the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board has pumped so many billions of dollars into Germany that they dare not name the total.
Just another quick interjection here, symbolically speaking. This is the symbol of the Federal Reserve, and kind of similar to old symbols that were used in the past. And if you go through this symbols page of Nazis, you will see that that one that I just showed you is few and far between, because they don't want you to make that relationship. However, there is another one here. Now, once again, you take a look at this symbolism. They go, well, it's not a Nazi one because the head's turned the other way. See? It doesn't make us Nazis. Anyway, wanted to show you the symbol relationships here with Federal Reserve. The people that were, supplying the Nazis with their fun stuff. Okay.
Franklin D. Roosevelt was swept into office during the 1932 presidential election. Once Roosevelt was in office, however, sweeping emergency banking measures were immediately announced, which did nothing but...
Okay. All right, and here's another thing that I indicated in my videos about FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who has done so many great things for our great nation. Playing both sides is what Roosevelt did, and kept the bankers in their power, and that was his job. And at the same time, making it look like he's saving us and
power over the money supply.
He's a shill.
Then, and only then, did the Fed finally begin to loosen the purse strings and feed new money out to the starving American people. At first, Roosevelt railed against the money changers as being the cause of the Depression. Believe it or not, this is what he said on March 4th, 1933, in his inaugural address. Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion, rejected by the hearts and minds of men. The money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. But 2 days later, Roosevelt declared a bank holiday and closed all banks. Later that year, Roosevelt outlawed private ownership of all gold bullion and all gold coins, with the exception of rare coins.
Okay.
Roosevelt convinced the public to give up their gold by saying that pooling the nation's resources was necessary to get America out of the Depression. With great fanfare, he ordered a new bullion depository built to hold the mountain of gold the U.S. government was illegally confiscating.
And that, excuse me once again, that is called a shell game. The shill plays a shell, and the shell game is, let's put all the gold right here. And, oh yeah, it's in there. All you got to do is just pop on over, and nobody's allowed within 2 miles of the place, but yeah, it's in there. Yeah, sure it is. Yeah, we got to guard it.
1936,
all the guards
U.S.
prove
bullion
it.
Depository at Fort Knox was completed. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations which grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered.
And that's the exact quote that I used in the video that that I'm vindicated upon. So I wanted to bring that up too. Now I think this is the part I was looking for. Let me just get into the Lincoln section. And,
the central bankers loaned Napoleon III of France, the nephew of the Waterloo Napoleon, 210 million francs to seize Mexico and station troops along the southern border of the U.S., taking advantage of their war to violate the Monroe Doctrine and return Mexico to colonial rule. No matter what the outcome of the Civil War, a weakened America, heavily indebted to the money changers, would open up Central and South America once again to European colonization and domination. The very thing America's Monroe Doctrine had forbade in 1823. At the same time, Great Britain moved 11,000 troops into Canada and positioned them menacingly along America's northern border. The British fleet went to war alert should their quick intervention be called for. Lincoln knew he was in a double bind. That's why he agonized over the fate of the Union. There was a lot more to it than just differences between the North and the South.
Okay, this is another thing I brought up in my Civil War video. The Civil War and particle physics. Watch that and then compare the information on that to this. And once again, I stand vindicated on the top of a mountain with my fist in the wind, screaming that I have vanquished my enemies.
That's why his emphasis was always on union and not merely the defeat of the South. But Lincoln needed money to win. In 1861, Lincoln and his Secretary of Treasury, Salmon P. Chase, went to New York to apply for the necessary loans. The money changers, anxious to see the Union fail, offered loans at 24 to 36% interest. Lincoln said thanks, but no thanks, and returned to Washington. Lincoln sent for an old friend, Colonel Dick Taylor of Chicago, and put him on the problem of financing the war. During one meeting, Lincoln asked Taylor what he discovered. Taylor put it this way: "Why, Lincoln, that is easy. Just get Congress to pass a bill authorizing the printing of full legal tender treasury notes, and pay your soldiers with them, and go ahead and win your war with them also." When Lincoln asked if the people of the United States would accept the notes, Taylor said, "The people or any..."
I'm sorry. I have to interrupt for a moment and laugh and say the people don't have a choice whether or not to accept them.
Anyone else will not have any choice in the matter if you make them full legal tender. They will have the full sanction of the government and be just as good as any money, as Congress is given that express right by the Constitution.
And again, this is just part of our nature and world and way. I mean, if you go to, let's say you take a visit to Germany, and you get some Deutschmarks, German money. And what are you going to do? Look at it and say, well, this isn't money. I'm not going to accept this. And if your government gives you something and says, all right, now this is our new money, what are you going to do? Argue with them? And so we are so accepting, and that's how we're trained, and that's just called, patriotism, which I'm really not making fun of. I just believe that the entire world is a unit of people that are not separated because...
So that's exactly what Lincoln did. In 1862-63, he printed up $450 million worth of the new bills.
Point of this video, we have to get the mindset back that we, as a nation, can print our own money, break free from the banking system. I will probably take a bullet in the head for this, but we got to wake up on this, because it's us that has to create this change. Every little one of us, all together. I mean, you take a slave ship with 30 slaves and 4 guys running the ship, and you unshackle the 30 slaves, and then the slaves just sit there and go, okay, well, we're not going to make it if those 4 guys don't let us. No, slaves, get up, grab those guys, throw them overboard, and take over the ship. Pardon me, I'm getting so emotional. Back to Lincoln, and this is the first time this was done. And in an attempt to not bypass errors, this was the second time, according to our narrative history, that it was done. The colonial wars had scrip. So I wanted to mention that it had been done once prior to Lincoln's printing. And it's a big deal. In
To
my
distinguish them
opinion.
from other banknotes in circulation, he printed them in green ink on the back side. That's why the notes were called greenbacks. With this new money, Lincoln paid the troops and bought their supplies. During the course of the war, nearly $450 million worth of greenbacks were printed at no interest to the...
And once again, if we had these, if we had these once again, we could have the Buffalo Bill. So, who doesn't want that?
federal government. Lincoln understood who was really pulling the strings and what was at stake for the American people. This is how he explained his rationale.
The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest creative opportunity.
Greatest creative opportunity. The government's greatest creative opportunity to use their own assets, their own industry, their own people to back the paper that they're printing, and not have some faceless corporation do it for them. And the interest rates would drop, and the government would make so much in just small interest rates, and compared to what is happening and what's been happening since before I was born.
By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest. Money will cease to be master and become the servant of humanity.
Wouldn't that be nice?
A truly incredible editorial in the London Times explained the central banker's attitude towards Lincoln's greenbacks.
If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origins in North America, shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish...
Okay, let's hold up here. If this mischievous financial policy... Right, the central bankers say if this mischievous financial policy, which has its origin in North America, shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts. It will be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce.
It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe.
The scheme was effective, so effective that the next year, 1863, with Federal and Confederate troops beginning to mass for the decisive battle of the Civil War, and the Treasury in need of further congressional authority to issue more greenbacks, Lincoln allowed the bankers to push through the National Bank Act. These new national banks would operate under a virtual tax-free status and collectively had the exclusive monopoly power to create the new form of money, banknotes. Though greenbacks continued to circulate, their numbers were not increased. But most importantly, from this point on, the entire U.S. money supply would be created out of debt by bankers buying U.S. government bonds and issuing them for reserves for banknotes. As historian John Kenneth Galbraith explained it,
In numerous years following the war, the federal government ran a heavy surplus. It could not, however, pay off its debt, retire its securities, because to do so meant there would be no bonds to back the national banknotes. To pay off the debt was to destroy the money supply.
later in 1863, Lincoln got some unexpected help from Tsar Alexander II of Russia. The Tsar, like Bismarck in Germany, knew what the international money changers were up to and had steadfastly refused to let them set up a central bank in Russia. America survived and was able to remain out of their clutches. The Tsar's position would remain secure. If the bankers were successful at dividing America and giving the pieces back to Great Britain and France, both nations under control of their central banks, eventually they would threaten Russia again. So the Tsar gave orders that if either England or France actively intervened and gave aid to the South, Russia would consider such action as a declaration of war. He did the same with part of his Pacific Fleet and sent them to port in San Francisco. Lincoln was re-elected the next year, 1864. Had he lived, he would surely have killed the national bank's money monopoly extracted from him during the war.
Had he lived.
On November 21st, 1864, he wrote a friend the following.
The money power preys upon the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than bureaucracy.
Shortly before Lincoln was murdered, his former Secretary of Treasury, Salmon P. Chase, bemoaned his role in helping secure the passage of the National Banking Act only 1 year earlier.
My agency in promoting the passage of the National Banking Act was the greatest financial mistake in my life. It has built up a monopoly which affects every interest in the country.
On April 14, 1865, 41 days after his second inauguration and just 5 days after Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, lamented the death of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, and yeah, Lincoln, if he had been allowed to live by the, he's not going to be allowed to live, and anybody who stands up against these people in any way are not allowed to live. And when they want to create a war, they just have some huge catastrophe. And we fall for it every time because we're told this is the truth. And this is the predominant makeup of this video. I'm not going to go through this entire piece, but I also mentioned how Wilson was a shill. And if you go through or can take the time to get through this video, the Money Masters, links in my description, watch this baby and realize we can make a difference. By the proper decisions. I'm not sure if it's. I'm gonna dig into my brain a little bit deeper on all of the actual specifics it would take for us to do it. But I know it's a collective situation where enough people have to care, enough people have to realize what can be done, and then people in the right political positions. But how many of us want to take a bullet in the head from these guys? They know I'm. If you work with the Senate and the government, and I'm talking the truth. And if you watch any of my past videos, my dad talked to me about his position in World War II. What little I did know, Dad, and so that might have a lot to do with the way I think. So I'm going to leave it at this. I know it's going to be not as giggly and funny as most of my haphazard recordings, and I dreadfully apologize, but this is really important, and I'm looking forward to that bullet in the head, so I got to get it out right now. And like, comment, and subscribe, so you can unsubscribe later. And this is validation and verification that Hitler was hired. End of video. Talk to you soon. Hopefully.
Say hello to my little friend.